The United States didn't lose the war in Afghanistan because it was weak. It didn't lose because its soldiers lacked courage. And it didn't lose in August of 2021 when the Taliban entered Kabul. In reality, the outcome of the Afghanistan war was decided years earlier, quietly, while the United States was still winning battles, still rotating troops, and still believing the mission was under control. That is what makes this war so difficult to understand. Because for nearly 20 years, the strongest military in human history fought an enemy it defeated again and again, and yet never truly defeated at all. To understand why the United States couldn't win the Afghanistan war, we have to look past the final images and focus on something far more uncomfortable. The moment when the war changed, without most Americans ever realizing it. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States faced one of the clearest moral moments in its history. Nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in a single morning. Intelligence agencies quickly confirmed that the attacks were planned by Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, who was operating openly from Afghanistan. At the time, Afghanistan was ruled by the Taliban, an extremist regime led by Mullah Muhammad Omar. When the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden, President George W. Bush authorized military action. The mission was focused, justified, and widely supported. Destroy Al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban from power, and make sure Afghanistan could never again be used as a base to attack the United States. Operation Enduring Freedom began in October 2001, and what followed was one of the fastest and most decisive military campaigns in modern history. U.S. air power, special forces, and Afghan allies dismantled Taliban control in a matter of weeks. By the end of the year, the Taliban government had collapsed. American forces had achieved what many thought impossible in such difficult terrain. From a military perspective, the United States had done exactly what it set out to do. But one objective remained unfinished. Osama bin Laden escaped. In late 2001, U.S. forces tracked bin Laden to the mountainous region of Tora Bora. The terrain was brutal, the intelligence incomplete, and the U.S. relied heavily on local militias to seal the area. Bin Laden slipped across the border into Pakistan. The man responsible for the deadliest attack in American history vanished, and with him went the sense of finality the war needed. This moment mattered more than it seemed at the time, because without capturing bin Laden, the war did not end, it transformed. As the immediate shock of 9/11 faded, American leaders faced a difficult question. What happens next? Leaving Afghanistan unstable risked allowing extremist groups to return. Staying meant committing to something far larger than a counterterrorism mission. Gradually, almost without announcement, the mission expanded. The United States shifted from defeating terrorists to rebuilding a country. Washington committed itself to creating a new Afghan government, training a national army, and establishing long-term stability. The goal was not domination. It was prevention. American leaders believed that a stable Afghanistan would protect the U.S. homeland for generations to come. But Afghanistan was not a country that could be rebuilt using blueprints drawn thousands of miles away. Decades of war had fractured its society. Tribal loyalty often outweighed national identity. Power was local, personal, and shaped by survival. In vast rural areas, the central government in Kabul had little presence or legitimacy. While American planners focused on institutions, elections, and national forces, many Afghans focused on one question: who will still be here tomorrow? This is where the Taliban adapted. After their initial defeat, Taliban leaders did not attempt to challenge the United States head-on. They knew they could not win that fight. Instead, under Mullah Muhammad Omar, they shifted to a strategy built entirely around patience. They avoided major battles, blended into civilian populations, and relied on intimidation, local alliances, and fear. When U.S. forces entered an area, the Taliban withdrew. When those forces rotated out, they returned. The Taliban were not trying to win quickly. They were trying to outlast. They understood something fundamental about the nature of American power. U.S. soldiers deployed for fixed tours. U.S. presidents faced elections. U.S. public support had limits. The Taliban had none of these constraints. They were fighting for control of their homeland, and they were willing to wait as long as it took. This is the kind of history most textbooks skip. Subscribe to Let's Check the Facts. Geography amplified this advantage. Afghanistan's mountains, deserts, and isolated villages made permanent control extraordinarily difficult. American forces could dominate the skies, secure cities, and protect major supply routes. But holding every valley and village required constant presence. The Taliban exploited the gaps, establishing influence where the Afghan government rarely reached. To counter this, the United States invested heavily in Afghan security forces. Tens of billions of dollars were spent training and equipping the Afghan National Army and police. On paper, these forces were large and well-armed. In practice, they depended heavily on American air support, intelligence, logistics, and maintenance. Corruption weakened command structures. Some units existed mostly on paper. Many soldiers were poorly paid or unpaid altogether. Still, the United States did not walk away. Under President Barack Obama, the war entered a new phase. Beginning in 2009, the U.S. launched a major troop surge aimed at reversing Taliban momentum. General David Petraeus led a counterinsurgency strategy focused on protecting civilians and denying the Taliban local support. The surge demonstrated American resolve and temporarily improved security in key areas. But once again, the Taliban waited. They avoided decisive engagements, preserved their forces, and watched as timelines were announced and withdrawal dates discussed. Each signal reinforced their belief that the war would end on their terms, not America's. As the years passed, Afghanistan faded from public attention. Casualties continued. Costs climbed into the trillions. Political leaders struggled to explain what victory now meant. The war had no clear endpoint, no surrender ceremony, and no obvious path forward. It continued because ending it seemed risky, and continuing it seemed familiar. Under President Donald Trump, that calculation changed. In 2020, the United States negotiated directly with the Taliban. The agreement established a timeline for U.S. withdrawal in exchange for Taliban assurances regarding terrorism. For the Taliban, the message was clear. The United States was leaving. Time had done its work. When President Joe Biden took office, he faced a decision shaped by 20 years of war. He could delay withdrawal and continue a conflict with no clear end, or he could accept the reality that American presence was no longer changing Afghanistan's trajectory. Biden chose to leave, arguing that America's core mission, preventing another large-scale attack, had been achieved. Once the withdrawal began, the collapse was rapid. Afghan forces, built around U.S. support, lost confidence and cohesion. Cities fell with little resistance. For Americans watching from home, the speed was shocking. But the collapse was not sudden. It was the final stage of a process that had been unfolding for years. In the end, the United States did not fail in Afghanistan because it lacked power, commitment, or sacrifice. American forces removed the Taliban from power, protected the homeland for 2 decades, and prevented another attack on the scale of 9/11. What the U.S. could not do was impose long-term stability on a country whose internal dynamics resisted it. The Taliban did not defeat the United States on the battlefield. They survived it. Afghanistan revealed a hard truth about modern warfare. Military power can win battles, remove regimes, and buy time. But it cannot always reshape societies or defeat an enemy whose greatest weapon is patience. The Afghanistan war was not lost by American soldiers. It was decided by time, strategy, and limits, long before the final helicopter ever lifted off.